This bottle of wine is keeping it cool for me because it's cold. Um, so I mean, I guess yeah, I guess there's a few places that we can start. I feel like the most relevant place is that of like QAnon. So I think that's like a big thing that has maybe been thinking a lot about conspiracy theories, especially being that um, like impersonally, QAnon's like a big conversation right now because we have two people that, or one that is likely going to Congress, and I saw there's like upwards of like maybe 80 people that have been running in the 2020 election that to some extent has been somewhat supportive of QAnon. So clearly, it's not just like a fringe thing anymore. It's something that has to be taken seriously, even though it's a conspiracy theory. But I mean, beyond that, like just thinking about conspiracy theories, I think are interesting. The way like growing up, how I internalized some conspiracy theory logic, especially in like Christian cultures, conspiracy like cultural conspiracy theories about like the Illuminati or what have you. I don't think I ever subscribed to something like that explicitly, but that flavor of like there's some secret cabal or like some bad actors behind the scenes trying to like infiltrate the youth or like spread evil. I mean, I feel like that thing was pretty common growing up for me. I definitely had a few church sermons that leaned into that and like leaned into like evils of like pop culture. So I just think it's interesting. So I went kind of on a deep tunnel dive of like conspiracy theories as well as um, I think I think the conversation for me was kind of dismissive or almost like at the expense of those that believe conspiracy theories, right? Like they're uneducated or uninformed or like, it's something that it's easy to look down upon. But I think after just like kind of reading a bit, I listened to like a video essay by Angie Speaks, which was really good. I listened to a little bit of this author, Jesse Walker. Um, but
The video you're talking about that's not the one you sent me, right?
I don't know if I've
Okay.
sent you any Angie Speaks videos.
Well, you sent me like a summary of QAnon video a while ago.
Yeah. No, I think that
Okay.
was like a news, like it's strictly informational. No like critical analysis.
Okay.
I think I was pretty intrigued and compelled in that the way that they framed it, Angie in particular, was that conspiracy theories are really just modern day folklore, and the way that we use folklore to analyze previous societies and like the types of anxieties that those society has, I think is the same, and that's how we should treat conspiracy theories of today, which to me unlocks a pretty interesting few like directions we can go in. But that's been top of mind. Again, QAnon is like the most relevant topic today. So we could either talk about QAnon at first. I didn't know if Leslie, you would feel comfortable. I know we've interacted, and by we, largely you, with someone that's a QAnon supporter, which I think this conversation actually gives some more light into the psychology of it. I'm not excusing anything, but I think that like a place of understanding. Um, I think that might be a good place for some conversation to start. If you're okay with that, like to the extent that you're cool.
Yeah, might as well. We can. And it's
Obviously, no names.
no, yeah, it's definitely not just one person though. Like I will say that many people at that organization are now like loud and proud.
Oh God. But I guess like a quick like summation of QAnon is this idea that in 2017 there's this person or group of people named Q that are in the Trump administration, and Trump's a part of Q, and what they're doing is taking down the deep state, and there's this conspiracy that there's like this secret ring, a pedophile ring of powerful people who are not just pedophiles, but they drink blood, and that keeps them youthful or something. Like there's some
No,
sort
they
of,
drink adrenochrome. They extract adrenochrome, which is some chemical that I think is actually real that the body produces when you're scared. And the versions I've seen of it are that they like keep like kidnapped child, yeah, like sex slaves, but also they like terrify them. It's actually literally like Monsters Inc. You know, like the Scream. It's literally like they scare the kids and they extract this adrenochromin or adrenochrome, and that's what keeps them. That's what I've heard. And then there are
that
also
sounds
cannibals
right.
who also eat the kids. Yeah. And Hillary Clinton
Sick.
definitely takes it. Yeah, like they've,
The
according
Clintons,
to,
the
yeah,
Obamas, John
Chrissy
Podesta. I heard
Teigen,
that
Chrissy Teigen.
um, Chrissy Teigen,
She got a,
Kobe.
wait, what? I had,
There's some the death of Kobe got tangled up into some of the
oh
conspiracies
my
about
gosh, that's so embarrassing.
it.
Yeah, no, Chrissy Teigen, I don't know if you guys heard about it. Like she got like attacked on Twitter, but also deleted like 30,000 tweets. I guess because and of course that just like added more fuel to the fire. You know, they're like, "Oh, see," but she was like, "No, I mean it's because you guys are like literally psychotically analyzing every." And also, isn't Pizzagate involved too?
Yeah, there's Pizzagate like overlap as well.
Sorry, continue your summary. I just had to insert. It's not just drinking blood. It's like a specific, although that's probably.
Well, that's the core of it. The tricky part, and this I think is common with most conspiracy theories that we can talk about, but the boundaries of it are pretty fuzzy, so it can be scaled up or down. So reading into like YouTube comments of people that are like supporting QAnon, you get like this gradient of like people that adhere to that like almost like dogma of the conspiracy theory, but when challenged, because a lot of the stuff obviously is baseless, they scale it back and say, oh no, like QAnon is just the idea of like questioning everything that the government's doing and keeping it as like slimy and slippery as possible, so that it's like outside the boundaries of criticism. I think there's probably a gradient of people that have different levels of belief in the dogma of it or what have you. But that's the original dogma, right? Like basically Trump is almost like a white knight figure who is a part of some secret group that's trying to overthrow the deep state, with every piece of that, every definition of that being as slippery and slimy as possible.
And that's also why the media hates him so much, is because they're all in on
They're a
it.
part of it. Yeah, they are.
Meant to destroy him. Also, I don't know if you guys saw, but he like commented on it. Like someone asked him, and he was like something. He was something like, "Well, I haven't heard of this, but it sounds like if they're fighting evil, that's good, right?" Isn't that basically like what he said?
He basically said, I don't know much about it, but they say that I'm doing good things, and that sounds like a good thing.
Yeah.
It's like, got it.
Like classic Trump.
But to be fair, I don't think it's Trump. I don't think he's smart enough to know what it is as much as he knows it helps him. But like his kids have posted QAnon content, like the Q and shit, and they've like tried to delete it afterwards. But it's clear that I highly doubt any of them believe it. They all know it's nonsense, but it's clear that as a movement, they know it benefits them, and they're willing to give it some legitimacy, which only feeds the rabid QAnon followers, which are like, oh, see, he's giving us more breadcrumbs, as they call it, are like signals and like clues of what he's doing to overthrow the deep state and the Great Awakening, etc.
That's honestly why I was confused, that I would have thought Trump's like team would have wanted to capitalize on it more. So I was like surprised the way he answered. I thought he would have tried to be a little bit more like playing the role of I don't know, but like, really actually stoking the fire. Like I'm curious if he genuinely hadn't heard about it, or if he just,
there's no way.
Yeah, I don't know.
Leslie, just a response to your thing about like you were surprised that Trump played into it rather than being like, oh, I don't know.
No, he did say I don't know.
Oh, you're saying you thought he would have played into it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Actually, yeah,
But
I agree.
What were you gonna say though?
Well, because have you guys been getting Trump and Biden campaign ads on Facebook?
Unfortunately.
No, I've been getting text. I thought you were gonna say text.
I've gotten the text too, but I screenshotted some of the Trump. This is literally, and I'm assuming this is Trump's campaign team. It might not be, so just for anyone watching, it was like, Ortiz was spreading false information. Go fuck yourself. Oh. It says Team Trump. And let me establish who I am very quickly on this podcast. If you're like, oh, Ortiz, we're just three people who aren't experts in QAnon or politics. Well, Vince is very well read in politics, but
I believe in QAnon. To be clear, I'm actually advocating for it in this conversation.
Also, to be clear, when you talk about our audience, you're literally talking to each of our moms. Okay, so that is going to be our initial audience. Let's be real.
Besides Vince's parents, besides Leslie's parents, everyone else outside of that who would look at me and go, "Oh, Ortiz is like, look at," especially if you're a Trump supporter. By the way, I voted for Trump in 2016, not do it in 2020. Anyway, anyone who's like, "Oh, Ortiz is like, slandering Trump and spreading false information on," fuck yourself. So I screenshotted this, and it was like the most funny thing. It's the funniest thing in the world to me. This was one of his campaign ads that came across my Facebook feed. Let me see if I can
Oh my God.
It was like a Biden Trump Street Fighter. So I thought Leslie was saying she thought Trump wouldn't play into it. But yeah, it just goes to show like the level of like I don't know the word to use, the level of like childlike jest that he's willing to engage in. And it clearly also for me, like we can get back to the QAnon thing real quick. It just points to to me, that level of jest, I don't know if it could actually be working with his demographic. To me, it hints of desperation of, oh shit, I don't think that's like a sophisticated tactic. I think you guys are just like playing in the meme culture. I'm not sure if that's actually going to work. And it seems like you guys are desperate and trying to reach for anything. You guys are reaching, and it means that like you're not so sure that this go around that your guy is as secure for the office that as you thought he might have been like a year ago. Anyway, back to the QAnon thing.
Yeah, well, on that note too, a quick aside to what Leslie said. So to be fair, I think he played into it just as much as he could, but I think there are concerns about QAnon tied to domestic terrorism threats. A lot of people in the establishment are trying to distance themselves from it. So I can imagine that he's smart enough to know that he can't be explicit. So I think what he did was enough to get the base riled up, and then he can say, but on the note of like his meme tactics, a part of Angie Speaks video was actually a slight aside on the meme. There's like a meme theory, and the way that memes are like a phenomenon of spreading ideas and propaganda, and the ways in which memes do that. So I think it's fair to call it childish, but I actually think it's more effective than like some very PC, like I'm above this discourse bullshit that frankly the Democrats really like to do, which is why they lose all the time, because they feel like they're too good to do those games. And even if it's childish, I think it's interesting that just that you mentioned that, because a part of that video was like meme theory and using memes to spread these conspiratorial ideas is actually really effective. So we find it silly, but people eat that shit up, which is something
that's
forget.
True.
To be clear,
so many memes about it, about QAnon. But before I cleared out people from my friend list who were associated with that certain organization, I still have some of them because I wanted to keep that voice, so I knew what was being said. But a lot of the people, I did. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
No, to be clear though, I do agree with Vince. Like, this is going to be such a weird meta podcast comment. So I was listening to the Joe Budden podcast, and they talked about in it, there's a company that purchased a meme company. So there's a company that makes memes and like viral videos, and it might have been Warner. I think Warner purchased a meme company. And then they went through a breakdown of the money they spent on the meme company was equivalent to what they would have to spend on a significant artist's catalog. So Joe Budden was asking, what does it tell you as a general consumer? Or he was asking his podcast friends. He was like, what does it tell y'all who are savvy in the music industry when a media company like Warner, instead of buying an artist's catalog, invests in memes instead? So like to speak to to validate what Vince was saying and my agreement, but my nuance of agreement with him and the power of memes. Yeah, I think me watching how Drake has used memes in his career, especially in times when other artists are trying to discredit him as a rapper, me watching how memes have turned Hamilton into this whole thing on Instagram, me just understanding the power of memes and GIFs on phones, I do very much so agree that it's like, in many ways, it can be a clever, sophisticated tactic. I don't know enough about politics to be sure about this next statement. I think Trump's memes as a campaign tactic is only going, especially that level of meme, that level of crude meme, is only going to reinforce his base. But if what has happened in terms of the Black community and police brutality in the past several months, if that's possibly mobilizing enough persons to go out and vote for someone other than Trump works, then I think Trump is in a dangerous place in terms of needing to get people that are on the fence that normally wouldn't go out and vote to try to get them to vote in order to outmatch the numbers of what I think is going to happen for Biden and Kamala. So although I do think it's a very good way for him to just like, his base is like salivating and like, and they're like just so happy about his childishness. I also do think that it's only going to reinforce the people who already support him. I don't think anyone who's on the fence or kind of like, I don't know, or whatever, or who's like just disinterested is going to see that and go, I need to go vote for, like, you know. So I think it's an interesting game, and I'm curious to see how this next election pans out.
I'm curious.
I have something to pulpit on the topic of what?
Sorry, go ahead. No, I was just saying I'm also curious, but scared, upset, fearful of the election. But yes, Harry Potter.
Same. I have something to pulpit on the topic of memes, which is that, okay, what makes memes so relatable and trustable in their original wave of memery was that they distilled life into or a show that we all love or a creator that we all know and love. They would distill it into just like an image and some words on top that we all recognized the original truth of. And that's why it's so fun to share memes. And I think that that's why they're such an effective tool, particularly with people who are ride or die Trump, because I do think at this point, people who are ride or die Trump have bought into, it's a mythology almost. Like, it's not even at this point, I don't know, man. It's like you've bought into a story. You are playing a part in a story. And this actually connects back briefly. I'll skip over to like my deconstruction when I read this book called Ishmael. And it's a very good book. It just makes you think. And basically one of the big things that it posits is that if people believe a story to be true, they will live in a way that makes the story become true. They will enact the story because they already think that they're in that plot line. So where there was no plot line, if enough people believe, they're just part of it. It's not that hard for them to make it true. And I think that is what's happening with Trump people. And that's why those memes are so popular in spreading QAnon and even in for support of him, because it's been treated as a medium, ironically, even though we don't take them that seriously. I do feel like it's wired into us to treat memes as like, oh, this is like a distillation of something we all know anyway. And so then it's like really easy for people who are like to see a video or a picture of Hillary Clinton's face and like juxtaposed next to like a screaming child and then next to like a vial, and to be like, you know, see, she's looking so old because she hasn't been getting her adrenochrome. And it just, instead of being at all subject to the normal rigors of that kind of accusation, it just feels like, oh no, we've already know that. So this is just a distillation, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
guess, oh, go ahead.
I mean, do you think that's true about memes? Because that's just something like I was just thinking about in context of this conversation, like why are memes so powerful? Like, do you agree that like that's sort of where they started and like why they became so popular in the first place? Not specific to QAnon, just like in general.
I wish I would have read some meme theory before we started. So, but yeah, totally. Like, I think that's 100% spot on, and why it's such a useful tool for spreading. Like, I imagine the narratives that it spread. Like in the case of conspiracy theories, maybe it's not spreading a narrative where someone, like, we're not about to be convinced by a QAnon meme. Like, we have like a very like, we're not buying into the narrative at all. But people that maybe don't really buy into QAnon, but like some of that narrative, they haven't placed any concrete opinions in that vacuum of opinion. I feel like memes have a really good way of just kind of morphing that narrative, I guess, and making you more susceptible to that narrative, making it more believable, making you maybe desensitized to it. But yeah, I think what you described sounds right.
Meme theory. Yeah, I'm super interested. I didn't know there was discourse upon it.
Yeah. Now, I remember back in the day, since I was a young little nerdling on the internet, memes meant something a little bit different growing up. So I think it's curious to see what it's evolved into now, because before it was just almost like a reoccurring joke that you would like lean into, like I don't know. Wow, it's been a while. Like the bread, like there's like a cat that was like a bread cat. I forget now. It's been a very long. It's been.
Oh, the cat that looked like a little loaf of bread.
Yeah.
Or the baby arms that looked like bread. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, which
Wait, now
4chan
we're
which
circle back
4chan board
together.
were you on back in the day?
Oops. Revealing my ties.
Yeah. Or like Raffle Copter. I don't know. Lols.
Raffle Copter.
Yeah.
That's like.
But so I guess sorry, I know we have a time limit, so might be a little heavy-handed producing. But I guess let's say I'm curious. I mean, we talked about QAnon in the abstract. I'm curious, like, do you feel like, did you ever get to talk about it with the people that you used to interact with that were into it, or even if not explicitly, did that inform any of their conversations with you?
You know, looking back, so I feel like I became aware of what I now know as QAnon like 2 years ago, maybe, because there was like one person from that old organization that would post stuff about the adrenochrome or whatever it's called, adrenochrome and adrenochrome. And even at that point, I started to sort of distance myself from that person because I was just like, and I wasn't close enough to them either to like be like, hey, want to talk about this stuff that you're posting, you know? And this was like a full grown adult man who was posting it. And then sometimes people from that organization would like or interact with that content. But no, I mean, it hasn't been until around the time that I left that it's been like a full blown, like I'm seeing people just come out and like say they support it or just say things that make it obvious that they believe that narrative. But looking back, I mean, that whole just general mistrust of institution is at the root of, and was in a lot of conversation. And that's the thing is like, I mean, I agree with that to a certain extent. And like, I've actually always kind of said, like, I don't like immediately dismissing conspiracy theories because I feel like it's worth like, you know, looking at them first. And I think that's the trouble with QAnon in particular, is that it's just the line gets so quickly accelerated from like, yeah, we do feel like there are probably some bad actors like in high positions of power, and there is a reason to mistrust these large institutions, and there is a reason to mistrust the media and all that stuff. But it gets swept into a narrative where the people who believe it are allowed to be both like the victims and the heroes, which I think is very appealing to people who still support Trump. I think that it's so appealing to be able to be like, I don't even know how they're the victims, but somehow they are. You know, isn't that like common? Like that feeling is there, like, because I guess because they're oppressed because no one will believe them, and everyone just thinks they're crazy conservative Christians. And
well, I don't know if I would. Maybe I would say that it's like there's like a victim-ish feel to it. But I guess that kind of goes to like, and even you mentioning like you always saying like it's worth exploring conspiracy theories, I really respect, because I think for me at least, it's easy to think of conspiracy theories and again just be so dismissive as like that's something that someone with like a tinfoil hat, like flat earther, 9/11 was an inside job. Like when you think of that, you think of like kooky, like not worth of taking seriously. But I really appreciated like the framing of like modern folklore, and I think because of that, I think where I am where you have been, Leslie, in that no, like I'm not going to legitimize QAnon as a theory, but if I'm really concerned about it, that means I need to understand the underlying anxieties that this demographic feels, contextualize that, historicize it, and meet them at those anxieties, which are often anxieties that I share, kind of like you mentioned, right? Like, yeah, absolutely, I'm suspect of people in power. Absolutely, Epstein did not kill himself, and like that's his ties to Clinton, his ties to Trump, like his ties to like.
That's the ironic thing is I cannot wrap my head around. Anyway, yeah.
Well, Trump distanced himself, blah blah blah. Like, got it. But regardless, even if Trump had nothing to do with it, like if it was just the Clintons, like yeah, all these things totally agree with. And I think there's a danger in just being dismissive of those anxieties. And I think also it's not just an indictment of like the American right that's susceptible. It's an indictment of the American left, which I wouldn't call left, but the American left, aka Democrats, being so elitist and dismissive of those anxieties. I think it does speak to how out of touch they are, and how ill-equipped they are to deal with these kind of things. Hence why I think Trump still has a chance of winning. Um, but but I don't know. I feel like that topic of like folklore and anxieties is fun to kind of chew on and play with. So um, I'm curious, like, if you guys have any experiences in your life of believing in conspiracy theories. Some examples broadly, and then like my own, which I already kind of mentioned my own. But after like reading, like thinking through like witches and conspiracy theories when there was concern about women and having power, actually Christianity with both sides conspiracy theories, right? With Christians, like at the time, thinking something like Nero is the Antichrist, as opposed to the government at that time thinking Christians are a cult because they drink Jesus's blood, and like the crazy cultish people. Things of like Freemasonry. I went on like a long rabbit hole, like Freemasons and Illuminati, which have very clear historical there's historical explanations for Freemasonry, right? And the Catholic Church being scared of the Enlightenment period and thinking that they are, well, Protestants more so call them demonic and believing like that mystical version, but like Catholic Church thinking that they're just too secular. So all these things have like a historical root that just blossomed into conspiracy. And then like I think I just see growing up like Freemasonry, like of course there's some like demonic all-seeing eye that's like at the tops of power of society. And again, I don't think I ever explicitly believed any of that, but I think in the vacuum of really knowing the history and thinking about it, there are pieces of it that I was sympathetic to. So that being said, like I'm curious, like have you guys ever previously believed in any conspiracy theories or known anyone or had family members? And not only I'm curious about conspiracy theories, but I definitely would be curious to think like what anxieties did those conspiracy theories speak to, you think?
Well, let's get the elephant out of the room. We all believe that the Illuminati's real, right? I'm just kidding. Oh my gosh, your face.
I was like,
Or
tell me
plot
more.
twist. That was so funny. It's a good question, Kevin. That is a really cool framing, though, of it as folklore.
I'll send you the video.
Yeah, please do. And the underlying anxieties, that and it just that phrase, I feel like that relates to so much beyond conspiracy theory. It obviously relates to the Trump presidency. Like, it relates to the racism that we've seen amidst COVID, the anti-Asian sentiment.
Even like like black and white bad. I think it relates to things like like the religious right Christianity and like a grayish way. Like I think a lot of the conspiracy theories that I was susceptible to are anxieties around loss of power, switches and cultural dynamics in our culture, demographic switches, like all these things. Sure, like yeah, like you can point to like racism specifically, but I think there's an understandable fear of a group of people at once having the primary hegemony in a culture and a driver of culture and what's considered like proper, losing that. I think it's arguably a good thing, but like it's an understandable anxiety that needs to be spoken to as opposed to dismissed.
Right.
But yeah. What do you think about Kevin? Eyebrows?
What?
Look at him on his couch looking all contemplative. Contemplative.
So,
I'm just
you guys have said a lot. When you say what do I think, like specifically what do I think about which part?
Okay, if you have any piece that's top, oh sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say you don't have to reply to, like whatever spoke to you and what you want to respond to.
So just to clarify, Vince, I think you said two different things that seemed like I was like, wait, you said you believe in the QAnon thing, but then you said you don't believe it as a.
I was joking completely. I don't believe in
Okay,
QAnon.
okay.
Yeah, I was fucking with you.
I was like, wait, is he?
You just accepted that, Cal?
Wow.
Because wait, just to clarify, QAnon is a. Tell me if what I'm saying is if I'm understanding correctly, if it's accurate. QAnon is a conspiracy that non-Trumpers came up with to talk about this elite group of people who are helping Trump behind the scenes in various ways.
So it's a very pro-Trump conspiracy. So it's people that think Trump is a savior of some sort, and they believe that there is a secret group of insiders, Trump of which is included, that are going to soon have a great awakening where they're going to reveal like this cabal of like pedophiles that are at the head of society, right? Like drain the swamp, but in a very conspiratorial sense, which culminates apparently. QAnon don't kill me if I'm wrong, but apparently it culminates in him sending all these people, Hillary Clinton, etc., included, into Guantanamo Bay or something like that. So
I have not heard that part of it.
So that's like the high level, right? So Trump's the figurehead of this movement that's uncovering the evils that are happening in the deep state.
And it's not non-Trump people, Kevin, because I think you asked that, right? Like you asked, is it people who are against Trump who came up with it? No. It's people who support him. In their eyes, it's a good thing. Like obviously in their eyes, it's not a conspiracy theory. So it wasn't created as like a smear campaign against Trump. It's like the opposite.
Right. It came out end of 2017. So he had just got elected, and this was, I guess, a person named Q posted on 4chan that they were a part of the administration and that there was like a big great awakening upcoming. So it's pro-Trump, and it's directly inspired by the Trump election.
Okay. So yeah, the first time I heard about Q was a couple of months ago. Someone back from North Carolina asked me about it and what I thought, and I never heard about it. And even when they sent me some links on Wikipedia and Google, I was like, I still don't understand. So now
they're trying to recruit you?
No. They were sending it to me. This person
what if Kevin, without knowing it, like had been recruited?
He was a part of QAnon this whole time. Oh. Ew.
Okay. No, it was someone who doesn't fuck with Trump at all was asking me because they had just heard about it, probably through like social media. Did Leslie disappear on us?
She was pissed at you.
Sorry.
Now you Gucci. So that was the first time I heard of it. Even when they asked me about it, and I Googled the phrase to see what a couple of articles said, like Wikipedia. I still didn't get it. So now that you guys have explained it, it seems more clear. Yeah, obviously, even after I voted for Trump in 2016 and then arrived to the place that I am at now, I think the idea that Trump is somehow part of this like great cavalry that's going to save America, and like it's like it's a joke. It's a joke. So I don't believe in the QAnon theory. Do I believe that that there's very powerful rich people in this country who are having a lot of who are having conversations that you have to have privileged access to those conversations in one way or another to even know that they're going on? Yes. Do I think that there's happenings amongst those rich, powerful people for things of good and things of bad? Yes. But I think that's like, I think if you were to measure any era of history where there was a powerful empire, whether it be the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Persian Empire, whatever, like I think
Byzantine had some good art and architecture.
So, but that's like, so anytime there was an empire with rich people, I think there was conversations happening that just weren't open to the general public. And so it's I think, to answer your question, I think the QAnon thing is silly. I don't believe in it. I don't subscribe to it. But to answer to the part of us that it speaks to about anxieties or mythology or folklore, what I will say is I think there is something about our psychology, our personhoods, our I don't even know how to explain it, but there's something about the human psychology that, of course, that obviously is satiated by these ideas. It's like it's enticed by the idea of folklore. So like even the most common folklore, dragon protecting gold encountered by night, or dragon protecting princess encountered by night. Like the general, if you disembody those figures, you take away the dragon. What is the dragon representative of? Chaos. Overwhelming chaos. What is the gold or the princess representative of? Something of great value. What is the knight representative?
I agree, but I'm hearing some Jordan Peterson. I'm trying to not hear it, but go ahead.
No, that's literally like, I mean, it's true, right? Like, otherwise, how do you describe those? It is that's very much where I got it from. But how else do you describe those folklores?
Nice little citation there, Vince.
So dragon, chaos, gold, princess, value, like, and then the hero. The knight, a hero, someone who willfully takes on a kind of, and you can see this in Pinocchio with the whale and his father in the belly of the whale, his father being representative of an ancestral spirit, and Pinocchio having to be someone who willfully takes on the journey to encounter something that's chaotic. So like the dragon, the knight having to be someone who's just a normal person who becomes a hero by virtue of taking on a journey to encounter something that's naturally chaotic, that's overwhelming. And then by virtue of, if you have the capacity in your journey to overcome the chaotic or to encounter the chaotic and be able to survive that encounter, then you naturally, your personhood, your psychology, your actual being, your ontology will develop and grow and evolve as a result. And like, that's literally like a biological being. Mm-hmm. In biology, they explain to you, in your brain, the only way you can unlock new proteins is if you put yourself in novel, stressful circumstances. So usually you go work out in the gym, and you can literally unlock proteins in your body. But like with me, I spent my whole life going through traditional grade school in America, and then I went to Bible college. But going to learn Arabic totally unlocked a different part of my psychology, a part of my brain, and it was allowing for unlocking of new proteins. And I learned this because while I was learning Arabic, I had a friend who majored in biology, and it said, yeah, there's literally proteins in your brain that will only unlock when you're in novel, stressful circumstances. So the idea of the dragon being representative of a kind of chaos that's novel and stressful, whether it's moving to a new city and having to learn the whole new environment and make a living, but a person who willfully decides to take on a stressful environment that's new to them, that they're not familiar with, that they're new to, it's not their motherland, it's not their mother tongue, it's not their it's not their native environment, and they have to go into a new environment that's stressful and that's chaotic to them, and then they have to try to succeed in that environment, whatever success means, will naturally develop into their ontology, into their being, a type of personhood that propels them forward, like forward in their journey or in their path or in whatever the case may be, because they become more of a person in that process. So that mythology that speaks. So you can literally depict those ideas within a bunch of different type of Disney movies, and it speaks to people. Like you can depict those in so many different ways, and there's something about our personhoods that's deep and locked. Like that narrative and that story. There's certain kinds of metaphors within folklore that if you just depict them, those metaphors, like people like rush to watch it and they love seeing and they love hearing about it. So something about the idea of this super secret, eyes wide shut parties in LA, or like there's these powerful rich people who are, I think it just, even as a child, right? Like you can turn a child's light on in their bedroom, look under their bed, nothing. But turn the light off and have that child stick their hand under their bed in the pitch black. Like your mind populates.
Shit, have me do that. I'm still freaking out.
Right? You're like adults, children, their mind populates things, right? So it's
the mind populates things. Yep, that is so relevant to conspiracy theories and QAnon specifically.
Because even with but like not to validate QAnon, but to validate the idea of folklore and mythology and something about our persons that calls out for mythology and folklore. Like, man, there's something very real about dreams. When you go to sleep, I don't know anyone who's been able to I mean, Freud has attempted, Carl Jung has attempted, but there's something very real about the nature of dreams where your mind and your soul, and if you believe in the soul, your psyche and your spirit, they're trying to communicate things to you, and they're trying to use these very fantasy-like, these very abstract elements of communication, whether it's animals or bodies of water or landscapes or people or conversations. And I think that again, I think the nature of dreams, I think mythology speaking to it. I just think that there's something in our personhood that calls out for, because like again, your mind will populate things. It calls out for mystery or conspiracy or secrecy or excitement or something hidden or something that needs to be uncovered or something that needs to be unlocked. And like we all know, the moment it gets the moment you figure out how a magician does his trick, it's no longer so like there's actually almost this self-perpetuating idea of it needs to remain a conspiracy, because once the magician shows you how the trick is done, you're no longer captive. So I just think there's something innate about human beings that we still haven't understood fully yet, that we like secrecy and myth and something that's like unknown and can't really be discovered or uncovered. Like, I don't know, there's something very cool. There's something very cool about the human nature, and that it's drawn to these ideas of folklore and mythology. The Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and even across in Mexican culture with the chupacabra, like there's just across different cultures, tribal or non-tribal, there's just these innate parts of people that call out that yearn for folklore and mythology.
I actually really think you bring up something interesting, a good framing. That's kind of the same question I asked before, but like a new framing. But I did want to, I guess, use this. I feel like this is a good place to illuminate, I guess, my worldview and like a leftist perspective. When we start talking about meta narratives and mythology, I think it's actually a really good ground for discussing differences in worldview. And the reason of that is like, I think in a very literal sense, I agree with you that there's a lot we don't know about the human brain, or like when it comes to mythology and our need for mythology. A leftist perspective would be that, no, actually, our time shouldn't be spent like overthinking the myths themselves and like trying to I guess a better way to say it is that a leftist perspective would be like, no, like instead of focusing on like diving too deep into the mythology, it's more better time spent to historicize it and have the kind of conversation we're having now about what anxieties in society and material condition based anxieties would lead someone to have these mythologies, if that makes sense. And that's just like the context, really just to share like what I would call a leftist worldview. And the reason why it's funny you brought up Jordan Peterson. Obviously he triggers me, but I think in this case, that's a really good segue into discussing. But I think the type of conversations Jordan Peterson would have about this mythology would spend a lot less time historicizing it and more time naturalizing it and really leaning into the mythology, if that makes sense.
What is historicizing?
Like historicize would say, what's a good example? What's a big like historical event or like myth I could draw from? Basically, like there's these folklores, and a leftist perspective would be like, okay, what material conditions would leave a population to believe these things?
So the witchification of women is a good one, right?
The what?
The witchification, the witch hunts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So inherently right-wing way of treating that folklore is to think of the biological ways that women are different than men. To think of, I think that's really the big one, like the woman's place in the hierarchy and a certain acceptance of the premise of that mythology. Of course, not believing they're witches, but a leftist would be like, okay, in this point in time, who was in power, who was in control, who had wealth, who had education, and these dialectics, right? These relationships of different conditions and different people groups. How could that inform a mythology where they are witches? And that's the conversation that is most important. Does that make sense? I don't know. I just feel like it's a good chance to share like how I view the world.
Yeah, I don't want to dive into it because it's too long of a rabbit trail off the original. But I do have a lot of thoughts on that, and but it's just so much. That could be a whole another 2-hour episode. But yeah, I never knew. Yeah, we should type that into the doc. I never heard of that perspective, of course, because I don't like. I think you would say Sam Harris is someone who would subscribe to that. What you just said.
Actually, no, I wouldn't.
Okay, so
I think he's closer in the spectrum to that, but I wouldn't say he's a leftist.
Okay. So I definitely never, of course, because clearly the people that I listen to, and whether it's through podcasts or YouTube, have never. I just that's never come up in conversation. And of course, the level of that kind of conversation that's happening, the only person, whether it's on my side of things or the leftist side of things, that's even talking about that kind of narrative is Jordan Peterson. So it's the first time I've heard of it, which I never thought about it that way. So it's a very interesting perspective. And being that this is the first time I've heard of it, I have to like sit with it for a long time to like really, and also probably listen to other content about it. But so just to comment on it, yeah, that's a very interesting way to put it in terms of historicizing it and trying to look at who's in power at the time and what material conditions contribute to that that framing of it. So yeah, I'm just gonna have to like sit on that for a while. But all that to say, yeah,
anytime. Call me later this week. You can smoke a bowl and talk about it. This is like the shit that keeps me up at night. So glad to talk about it anytime.
We should talk about this again.
But what I will say, so like, how do basically what I mean, and probably talking to you will help, and then getting your sources, citations on who is also a good source to go to. Because what I'm gonna attempt to do, at least if the content and the sources are bearable to watch. Sometimes people send me links to stuff, and I'm like, I don't give a fuck about this person. What I'm gonna try.
That's the hardest part. No, I get that.
So, no, I feel like Vince always sends like really like cool, relatable content creators, but who are also very smart.
I try because I get the same thing. Like if you send me a random old white dude, like I don't want to watch this dude. Yeah. Like I don't know. So I totally get that.
No, because like I was in a group, and I was in a 6-week discussion group around anti-racism recently, and one of the videos that was sent in the group, it was like a 30-minute video, and it was like a black theological guy talking about anti-racism and the identity of a black person in America and the perspective of the Bible and theology. And the whole time I kept thinking to myself, kill yourself. Like, you're such a poor lecturer. You're such a, I ain't politically correct, so we not about to even
have to be that extreme? Can you just be thinking, stop talking?
0 to 100. Off with your head. Off with your head.
We can't listen, because I do know how sensitive sensitive some cancer culture people are gonna be. Go fuck yourself. I refuse to like not be me. Like that's very my.
First, we need to get an audience before we go disparaging them. Okay, so let's just pipe it down. If you.
Maybe our audience. I mean, if it is our audience, they'll be somewhat aligned with our culture. So maybe they will have similar views on.
Like, oh, listen, this guy's so cool.
Well, no, listen. Which I know it's not very relatable to a lot of people. That's an era of like, I don't even want to say hip hop culture, but it was an era of hip hop culture that I came from, and an era of non-PC culture. Like comics kind of engage in that kind of humor, but there was a lot of hip hop people who engage in that kind of. It's just like this era of non-PC culture where it's like, I care about mental health. Y'all know this. I've been in a therapist's office this past year. I was sitting in a Lowe's parking lot last October talking about I don't want to do this anymore. And when I say this, I meant being alive. So I have very real sympathies for like people who have actual mental health issues. So it's not me making light of mental health issues. But like I speak how I speak, whether it's poetically, whether it's using these very harsh terminologies to express how impassioned I feel about something. So I just refuse to not speak the way I speak. But he sent me the lecture, and I was like, bro, nobody, like, you fucking suck as a lecturer. Like, shut the fuck up. And then, like, the contrast to it was, like, Dr. Cornel West, who's, like, he just story tells in such a life-giving, beautiful way. So yeah, I'm going to try to, like, inform myself about what you're saying. I just want you to know, like, it's going to be very difficult if the people who are the sources for informing me are, like, terrible lecturers or terrible storytellers or like,
no, I trust me, I definitely understand. And I'm always super hesitant to share for that reason specifically. I feel like it's not just the substance, it's like the form that I try and consider when I share content. But we can pin that. I know we have just a couple more minutes. Sorry for pushing us down a rabbit hole, but I guess kind of back to like conspiracy theories. And I think I lost the way you said it specifically, but the only time I'll entertain Jordan Peterson's framing of things is this idea of like being in new situations. And I guess you were saying like the way your brain responds or like has to create new, how did you say that? Can you?
Routines?
Yeah.
Yeah, so novel and stressful
Mm.
conditions and events are the way to unlocking new proteins in your brain.
I think it's beautiful because I think it's a good way of explaining kind of what we've been talking about and the anxieties of conspiracy theories. Like, what novel and new situations is like the Catholic Church encountering where they feel like they have to accuse the Freemasons and the Illuminati of being demonic or just like not of the Lord, or like
Mm,
what kind of novel situations do largely the white working class, which means that maybe they don't fit, they're white, but they still face class-based disenfranchisement. What new novel situation do they find themselves in culturally that would lend them to be susceptible to QAnon as a theory, right? And I think that's an interesting conversation because I feel like if we can
yeah.
get a good idea of what that is, then we can go to, I think, a necessary subsequent conversation of how do we counteract that, and how do we, I guess, do the work of pushing back on the proliferation of conspiracy theories, QAnon, or whatever it is. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah. The only thing I want to propose is like, because I'm only a 29-year-old, so I'm not very well read on like how historical events or current events or historical conditions can contribute to what you're saying and your explaining of it, or my
Mm.
subscribing to someone else's explaining of it. Um,
Mm.
I guess now hearing an opposing view or alternate view makes me sit here genuinely and go, I didn't come up with my view by like looking at the world for 80 years and going, oh, this is the way I think. Of course, across multiple cultures, that it's this way. I just listened to some guy for the past year and a half, which is not even a long time in the scope of history, and went, oh, sounds good to me, and it feels right to me, and it feels genuine. So now I sit here and I go, man, like I try to do with a lot of things. I hold both of them. I try to hold both of them in unison and go, these both can be right, and I actually have no monopoly on the truth. So now I have to sit here and legitimately argue with myself over it. So yeah, I like what you're saying because it's giving me something to balance out my current subscription with, and I have to now like sophisticate and nuance my thought, and I have to in what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna try to bolster your argument and your view and your position of things. I'm gonna try to bolster it and strengthen it as much as I can in order to attack my own, to see if there's any parts of mine that deconstruct or fall apart or need to be shaped or sharpened or nuanced or etc.
Well,
Kevin over here literally building two separate dragons to like set them to war within his own mind.
well, because this is a place where we agree that none of us are experts on necessarily anything. We're all here to learn. For Leslie as well, but Kevin, since what's like your gut? Like, I guess I'd be curious. I don't have that much time, but like,
No, we can go.
what,
I mean, we can finish our conversation.
and maybe this is bigger, like there's bigger facets than I anticipated, but I would love to hear like what's your diagnosis? Like, just as people that are living in our society, I think are thoughtful, perceptive, have a lot of different friends. Like, I guess what is your diagnosis of what the anxieties or like this novel situation is that would be such fertile ground for a QAnon, or just like I guess most of these types of conspiracy theories that we interact with, especially in the culture that we're from.
Such a
Um,
good question.
you know, to try to be as fair as possible. There is no, what I'm about to say isn't fair. It's very subjective to my POV. I I honestly believe, regardless of culture, regardless of where you are in history, so 2020, 1800, 17, regardless of language and like literally anywhere across the world, I just think the human being, the human nature, the human condition, the human psyche there's something deeply embedded inside of it that's attached to narrative and story. Like we love narrative and story. We love to like the fact that like these QAnon people are which some of it is like the fact that Epstein is like this clearly pedophilic person who did all these horrible things is clearly true, but the fact that they're constructing an entire cabal around him or around these things, and then uh casting Trump and QAnon as like the saviors who are going to, the cavalry is going to come in and save the day. there's a very real possibility that it is a historical thing, that it's about who's in office right now and the current conditions. It could be both or it could just be that. The part that I want to vouch for is I just think there's something deep about the human condition that believes in the idea of evil and malevolence and chaos and something in the dark that goes bump in the night. But then also you have to believe like there's something about the narrative of a hero or the narrative of someone who's going to come. So whether we place that on Trump and QAnon and the cabal, whether it's depicted in Harry Potter and Voldemort, whether it's depicted in way back early depictions of a knight fighting a dragon, I just think the human condition is prone to story and narrative, and which depicts itself in mythology. And then you'll see it come out and unfortunately in this case, because it's such a disservice to narrative and mythology, you'll see it come out in very crude ways like Trump and QAnon and the cabal. It's such a cheap, crude telling of original story that there has to be a villain, there has to be a hero, and there has to be a confronting by the hero of the chaos or the villain. It's like, no, that there's multiple cultures that have depicted and displayed that story across time. I just think there's something deep in us that we don't fully understand yet that constantly does that and wants to tell that story. But also, Vince, you're right. I think that a part of the reason why we do that is because we see actual playouts of it in actual culture, like where a tribe tells stories about snakes to protect its other tribesmen from getting eaten by snakes. But I also think that people might do it in moments in history because they do need novel experiences in order to evolve and grow as people. And so it's helping them to not only entertain themselves and distract themselves, but in some ways it's going to help them create circumstances by which they can try to interact with the world and what they believe in order to maybe unlock new proteins in their brains.
Very interesting.
Vince Mama, what's up?
What about you, Leslie? I guess like if you had to like, what's your gut diagnosis of like what anxieties do the folklore of Pizzagate and QAnon speak to?
Yeah, I'll answer, and then you have to answer too, and that would be like a good little wrap up. But I will say real quick, because it got brought up like 20 minutes ago, and I wanted to note, shout out to Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, because if there were one that I could yes! Because I love the idea so much. And I do feel like maybe if it's not the Loch Ness Monster and whatever iterations have been spun, like I'm sure there's like big sea creatures down there that we haven't met. But a gut diagnosis would be, and I'm just gonna say this, acknowledging that I'm probably wrong. And I actually would like to do some like reading, because I feel like they're probably oh, well, we can talk about that when we talk about Hamilton. But I think that this is probably a misdiagnosis, but it probably has some shades of truth, and that I think there are people smarter than me who have probably done a lot of reading that I could like, you know what I mean? Like, and then after that have a clearer idea. But the first things that come to mind, which I was thinking about for a while in this conversation, was, okay, a few things. First, I know that like the 2008 economic downturn affected a lot of the people that are in the category that are believing in QAnon, I think. So economic, just like sort of upheaval, and just a seeming continued breakdown of institutions' ability to really care for us, as in like the working class, seems to just be more and more evident. And then this is the piece that I don't think it's necessarily right, but I feel like it's part of the conversation, and it's a gut feeling of like, I think with the increased visibility of different, in some term, minority populations in the US having more of a platform for their expression of the ways that they have been oppressed. I think, you know, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, increased visibility for gay and trans rights. Like, I feel like that all has really stressed out, again, sort of a large piece of the base that comprises QAnon supporters, like white, conservative, maybe lower class economically people. And I wonder if part of it is like hearing something that's very strange to me is people who believe in QAnon but won't believe in systemic racism. Like, and people who treat systemic racism like it's a conspiracy theory. So, you know, like that's so prevalent, right? Like literally they will
Yeah.
talk about systemic racism the way that that we would talk about QAnon. And I just wonder if it's like stressful to hear all these stories that you just first like you can't believe because you have the privilege to not be able to really like relate. And so I wonder if that's output into like, oh, see, there's something that we're dealing with that we are fighting against, and like you guys are wasting your time on these things that I don't believe in, but like I'm spending my time well by like listening to Q and like, you know, posting about sex trafficking. And like it almost seems like it's like something for them, you know, almost like the White Lives Matter. I wonder, I feel like there's a convergence with the White Lives Matter idea where it's like, well, what about a white, even though it's not just white people believing in QAnon, but it's like something for them. And I also think it maybe ties in with the idea that they have, I think mostly, I'd be really interested at the demographics of QAnon supporters if that was possible, if it is majority white. And like, I think that it probably is. Even though I definitely know lots of non-white people who are down that trail, but um, it's almost like, you know, like we were talking about in America, how well we're able to think about these other issues because we've got like food, shelter, you know, basically like we have it better off than a lot of people in other countries. And I wonder if for a lot of the white people in here, white straight people who none of the last like white men who none of the last several big national conversations have involved, I just wonder if they have the mental space to, that phrase that you said, Kevin, fill in. It's enough structure, like, ooh, there's bad people in power. Ooh, we can't trust the media. Ooh, like, you know, and then they just have the space to populate it. And it also gives them room to be the hero in the story, again, because they're the ones who actually know and believe, and nobody else is smart enough to like see that this is all true instead of a conspiracy, and they're not a sheep. And yeah, because that's been a lot of the voice, right? Like, don't just be a sheep believing all these women in the Me Too movement, believing all these Black people saying that they experience it. Like, don't be a sheep, you know. And so
They call what they do research, by the way. Like people that are part of the movement, like QAnon movement, they're doing research, like finding the breadcrumbs. So yes, like
yes,
they're not being sheep; they're researching.
yes. So anyway, that's just kind of one that I don't think is answering your question in an overarching sense, but I don't think I'm educated enough to.
I appreciate your humility, but I guess the first would be an overlap with that one. And I will say a little bit with my chest. I'm pretty confident that it is an issue of loss of cultural hegemony, right? Like they're not the dominant culture, and the conversation of what the culture is moving forward largely doesn't include them, which I think is.
Oh, that's a nice distinct way of saying what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Which I think is an anxiety again. I think there's some indictment of people that aren't white in that, right? And that we are including them in the conversation in a way that's productive. But I think there is absolutely a cultural piece and a fear and like an anxiety of like that's centered in whiteness. I think it's also centered in masculinity, and this is kind of like a conversation that I think is interesting, but a tangent. The idea of like loss of something in the way that we vilified toxic masculinity, but have never provided a framework to replace it. We just say that it's shitty and like, how dare you have toxic masculinity without any examples of like, okay, well, how the fuck do I not be toxic and still be masculine? So I think those anxieties feed it. Another one that you also kind of already mentioned, but I think this isn't specific to that demographic. There's a very clear deterioration of the social contract in the US with our government. And I would absolutely agree with that anxiety 100%. But that anxiety is channeled in a place, obviously, that I don't agree with. It's a place of mythology and conspiracy. And again, I think it's also an indictment of people that do think and believe what I believe, and that we haven't also provided a counter narrative to combat or to fill in that vacuum that's now there in the loss of a solid social contract.
Well, and also that sex trafficking does exist, obviously, and
Yeah, absolutely.
that yeah, I mean, this side or whatever, people who are anti QAnon have not really also showed any care to be like, well, what is happening with sex trafficking, and like,
Right.
and actually literally guilty. I'll just say that because I haven't really done much research into it. I know that it exists, but I've been so turned off by QAnon that I'm just like, oh, that I will, but like, that's not, and that's so guilty. And when I think about it, that's exactly what so many people who are turned off by Black Lives Matter have done. I won't say it's like equivalent because once again, Black Lives Matter is not based on a conspiracy. Like it's, but I do think it's comparable in the sense that, some people just react to the worst of what they see coming out of the broad, uncentralized Black Lives Matter movement and are like, well, I do think racism is real, but I'm just turned off. But
Well, I think that's a good place to pin it. I think that's a good starting point for like strategy. Like, yeah, maybe sex trafficking is a place where we could be meeting them at a place where we can, have a bond and start from there. But
yeah,
good chat.
that was a really good chat. Good topic, Vince.
Well,
I'm glad that we pushed through and like had the conversation.
Yeah. Look at God.
Yeah.